Is human nature? Are we selfish, lazy, and violent? So, what is human nature? To begin with, we have to say that human nature is anything but one-sided. We have the capacity to exhibit all kinds of behaviours, but how we actually behave is anything but random. Our nature is not fixed or static, but in continuous flux, constantly adapting to the pressures of the economy, environment, and culture. As Marx stated, people make their own history, but they do not make it as they please. They do not make it under self-selected circumstances, but under circumstances existing already, given and transmitted from the past. Essentially, we have free will, but not in conditions of our choosing, and it's fundamentally conditions that determine our nature. Quote, "It is not the consciousness of people that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness." A key underpinning factor is evolution. As we touched on in prior sessions, somewhat unique to human evolution is that we excelled in the animal kingdom through solidarity, through cooperation and compassion. This is why, as in Chomsky's famous example, when we see a child drop their ice cream on the floor, we feel empathy. Another example is when someone is drowning. Our instinct is to help, regardless of familial or cultural relation. This altruistic compassion can even extend to different species, as is evidenced by how many of us feed and care for wild animals. Solidarity and empathy is hardwired into the vast majority of people. We are social beings that crave fairness, kindness, and collaboration. Our instinct is to do what is best for the community, for society. It takes very sophisticated state oppression and powerful cultural forces to make us behave in a way that is contrary to this. Such examples include being selfish and needing a job promotion over a colleague, or in learning derogatory views from our parents or peers. One other key evolutionary aspect to address is the propaganda around laziness. They say, communism could never function because nobody would choose to work. This is demonstrably false, as is evidenced by the over 14 million volunteering in Britain currently, typically on top of exhausting and demoralising wage labour. In many ways, it's this altruistic social human instinct that ensures society functions. What would society look like without people volunteering their time to help others? Well, there would certainly be no Your Party Bristol. This pernicious myth of people being naturally lazy was put to the test during the furlough period of COVID. As a result of being physically and mentally drained, I think most of us spent a few days eating takeaways and watching Tiger King on Netflix in bed. But people quickly got bored of this, and whether it was organising mutual aid locally, ensuring everyone was fed and safe, learning a new skill, a new language, instrument, technique, etc., most people took the opportunity to be creative, to get jobs done, to improve conditions for ourselves and our neighbours. This is evidently our basic human instinct. Another fundamental part of human nature is our survival instinct. Self-preservation and self-defence likely evolved as traits to ensure the continuation of our species. So although we evolved to be highly egalitarian, in some cases even willing to sacrifice our lives for others, we can also be selfish and violent, particularly when faced with extreme scarcity and hardship. However, in general, selfishness and violent behaviour is learnt, which is why some cultures and communities are far less so than others, and more inclined towards generosity and peace. For many nations that have not long had capitalism as their socio-economic system, it is often still custom to offer food and shelter to any stranger who turns up. Think how much less communal Britain has become just in our lifetimes due to the pressures of capitalism. Now we barely even know our neighbours, never mind share food or care for each other's children. Without a class-based exploitative system, and without scarcity, it's very likely we would behave in a communistic way similar to our time as hunter-gatherers, only on a far higher level, whereby we awake each day to work, not because we are motivated by money, as we weren't for hundreds of thousands of years, but rather, like for the millions of volunteers, our motivation is to be active in improving our environment, to shape and build a better society together. So if we're all communists deep down, then why isn't everyone behaving in a more progressive way? In contradiction to the evolutionary factors are conditions. On one hand, our instinct is to behave communistically. On the other hand, we are shaped from our beginnings in the womb by conditions. Factors such as culture, schooling, religion and climate can all play a critical role in shaping who we are and how we act. This is why your average person in Japan behaves and thinks differently to the average Venezuelan, for example, or why Liverpudlians are different to Londoners. The only significant difference is conditions. We've all seen the overwhelming evidence that shows that poverty is the main driving factor for crime, and societies with strong welfare states and workers' rights typically have far less crime. The main fundamental factor is what Marxists call the economic base. That is to say, Whilst culture, family, laws and education can all play a decisive role, in the final analysis, this all stems from the nature of class society and our subsequent access to and the conditions of our work for us and our families. The class we are born into plays a critical role in determining our nature. It is our class position and the work throughout our life that will largely determine our quality of life and outlook. In all parts of society, we are pressured and atomized by capitalism, which heavily promotes and relies on individualism and competition. Artificial scarcity is also a facet of class division that encourages us to be selfish, such as when competing for rented accommodation, or in fighting to get on the train home from work. The only way to truly resolve this is through abundance. Only then will our selfish habits transform into their opposite, and our survival instincts be less prominent. The pressures of capitalist society on human behaviour are extremely well illustrated in the film Sorry to Bother You. As with the example in the film, in order to climb the employment ladder, in order to achieve better pay and conditions, you must typically sell out humanity, and indeed sacrifice your own humanity. In order to become rich, you almost inevitably have to suppress and distort your instincts. You must become a social monster, someone who violates moral codes and works against and outside the interests of the community at large. A predator. What we are often told is human nature is but the nature of a tiny minority from a short episode in human history. Despite what we are told, that we are selfish and only work for ourselves, our labour is a collective effort. We work for humanity in general. However, under capitalism, general human want is reduced to minority interests. This contradiction is increasingly apparent to the public, as is the way forward. Expropriating the capitalist class as the only way to achieve greater equality and social harmony. This relationship between human nature and social conditions is summed up excellently in the following quote. To look at people in capitalist society and conclude that human nature is egoism is like looking at people in a factory where pollution is destroying their lungs and saying that it is human nature to cough. As we've touched on, our class, our relationship to production plays a critical role in our psychology, in how our humanity manifests. The working class knows through lifelong experience that society relies on the cooperation and sacrifice of our class. Whether it's in our workplace, in the teaching staff we entrust with our children, in the checkout worker at Tesco, most of us recognise on some level that we need and rely on each other. We therefore tend to feel a sense of camaraderie with others in the same situation, who are forced to sell their labour, as opposed to those getting rich off the labour of others or through inheritance. This is why working class areas tend to be the most welcoming, and why charity workers typically get the most donations in such areas and are treated with more respect. Conversely, for the capitalists, they learn to survive through competition, greediness and exploitation. They don't see those struggling, those in council estates or on checkout tills as equals, but as a drain, an inferior section of society, or a resource at best. The human nature of capitalists is distinctively more cruel by necessity. This is how you end up with Scrooge-like multimillionaire Christians such as Rees-Mogg and Charlie Kirk. And in order to justify the obscene immorality of their social position, the rich must endorse the most obscene lies. These myths include being exceptionally bright, uniquely hard-working, or even special alpha genetics, indeed born to rule just like the royals and the blue-blooded nobles before them. Capitalists propagate myths around selfishness to justify their position. They will say anything to try and convince us that capitalism and the behaviour of capitalists is natural. As for genetics predicating wealth, it's true that what you inherit determines your wealth. However, genetics and hard work are not the determining factor, it's nepotism. It's your access to capital. To quote John Galbraith, the modern conservative is engaged in one of man's oldest exercises of moral philosophy. That is the search for a superior moral justification for selfishness. Despite the best efforts of the ruling class, a new society is struggling to be born. Initiatives such as free pop-up libraries, food shares, community litter picking, and repair groups are all evidence of our human nature expressing itself in spite of the system and also in response to the crises of the system. There is every reason to think that human nature will continue to profoundly transform. However, this will only be a positive transformation if we lay the economic basis for it. Due to the crisis, we are compelled to organise against capitalism. Indeed, capitalism is inadvertently developing a human nature that is rebellious and coordinated, as that's how we survive, just like our ancestors before, by working and fighting together. such as through strikes, community initiatives, and defending each other against the far right. Ultimately, it's only by building a socio-economic system based on collaboration and peace that we can promote and uncover the best possible aspects of human nature. So I'm going to finish with one final quick quote. All history is but a continuous transformation of human nature.